Hello. Hi, 231. All right, I'm just showing you that we're looking at bones. I don't know why I can't hold this up today. Okay, so we're looking at bones, skeletal system, and you want to have these notes out. I might modify them slightly. There's some things I'm playing with, just so you know. And then we want to have our slides out. And as we begin this chapter, I just wanted to mention to you that unlike the tissues, this chapter and these chapters about bones and skeletal system are what you're doing in lecture is really different than lab. What I mean by that is in lecture, you're going to be doing things like how do bones form when you're in utero? Like how does this happen? And also, what's the nutrition for bones? What hormones are functioning in bones? What happens during puberty? What about I'll tell you what menopause is later, but what happens during the lifespan with bones? Bone remodeling. How does bone remodeling work? How are bones constantly being stressed, and how do they grow and shrink, unfortunately, or get less dense, more dense? These are the things that we're going to be doing in lecture. Whereas in lab, we'll be identifying bones. We have about 206-ish bones, identifying bone markings, things like holes in the bones, also identifying microscopic bone anatomy and that sort of thing. Now, I might do a little bit of that because it's easier to talk about things if I do a little bit of the anatomy, but that doesn't mean, so I'm going to be focusing on the physiology for lecture. But so just so you know, kind of like it is different. And that's why this is such a big system, okay? So much to learn. But I did want to talk about that, okay? All right, let's do this. Skeletal system. It's kind of like we'd be jellyfish without it, just kidding. But when we start thinking about the functions, we want, like first thing probably that comes to mind, what comes to mind? Like the first thing. It holds us up, support, right? It also does things like helps us, helps protect you and me. It also does mineral homeostasis. So it's like a storage facility for calcium and phosphorus. And then the last little thing on there, you'll see on your notes says hemopoiesis. So I'm the place that makes blood cells. So your bones make your blood cells. Cool, in your red marrow. It's inside your red marrow. So that's a really important part, really important function of the skeletal system. There's some other functions, but it's always good to just think about that. Those pieces that we just brought up. Cartilage, the ligaments and the tendons. So tendons hold the muscle to the bone and then ligaments hold bone to bone. Those are considered part of the skeletal system. And then individual bones you'll learn about in lab. And the things that wrap, connective tissues that wrap the bone, that's also considered part of the nervous system. Cool. So in lab, you're going to classify bones on six different categories. Is that right? Oh, looks like we don't have Wormian bones here. Okay, so there might be some other categories. I can see that your book only classifies them in 4. But it turns out, as far as physiology, how do bones form and how do they function, we really only need 2 categories for lecture, okay? So for lecture, we're really going to be focusing on bones that are flat, like your skull, like your sternum. They're flat, they're thin and flat, and they're formed differently than bones that are long, like your humerus, okay? So so for as far as we're concerned in lecture, they kind of act either as flat or as long. And these other pieces like short, irregular, Wormian, which isn't even on here, in lab, we'll worry about that. Does that make sense? So for lecture, we're really going to be focusing on, is it flat-like? Is it forming as a flat? Or is it long-like? And is it forming like a long? Sorry, like a long. All right, very good. Okay, so what we're going to do on this first page is just start to look at the structures. This is anatomy. I'm actually going to go one more slide. This is anatomy And so, but it really helps to have some of the language down so we can talk about it in lecture. Okay, so I'm not going to ask you like to identify these structures in lecture. You would do that in lab. But to talk about nutrition, to talk about hormones, to talk about how they're formed, we kind of need to go over some anatomy, okay? So the bottom of page, it says like, draw this. And this is the structure of a long bone. So this is a long bone. And you can see there's some pieces that we want to look at. First of all, long bones are really strong, by the way. Hold on, I'm drawing. Okay, the ends of the long bones are called the epiphyses. And inside the epiphyses, they have something called spongy bone. This is all spongy bone. Spongy bone looks different than compact bone. Compact bone is found mostly in the diaphysis or the shaft, the diaphysis, okay? So you can see this is all compact bone. Compact bone is very strong but heavy. It's very strong but heavy, and we'll talk more about that. So if you could make your whole skeleton out of compact bone, which is very strong, you would be a lot stronger, but you'd probably weigh 250 pounds. Not kidding. So the problem is you can't have compact bone everywhere. It's very, very strong and very dense, but we just can't. Everybody would look like what, the Hulk or some character like that. There's also a hollow spot. Let me put this in yellow. There's a hollow spot called the medullary cavity inside long bones. And what's stored inside there when you're an adult is yellow marrow, so mostly fat. But when you're a kid or a child, it's red marrow. And so we'll talk about red marrow more, like what are its functions and that kind of thing later. But red marrow is really important for cell production. All right, so down here at the ends, this is where we find spongy bone. Okay. There's also something called the epiphyseal line. You can see this right here. It's on both sides. The epiphyseal line is made out of bone, but when a person's growing in length, when they're getting taller, this line is actually called a plate, and the plate is made out of cartilage. And so we'll see how this works. This is me writing plate, which is pretty funny. We'll see when it's made out of cartilage, you can actually see it on an x-ray. You'll see a bunch of cartilage, not that I have epiphyseal plates, or you might've heard, but you'll see it, it looks like little lines. You can see bone and there's like little lines. That's because their plates are still open. So if you've ever heard this term, like, oh, their plates are closing, their plates are closed, or their plates are open, what they're saying is if the plates are open, they have plates, they have cartilage there, and the bone is still growing, and that person's still getting longer bones. And this actually lasts until you're about 25. Some long bones sometimes are growing until you're about 25. More on that when we talk about puberty. Okay, I'm trying to get you excited. All right, what else? Okay, periosteum. So a couple other terms. Periosteum, right here. Periosteum is a couple of cell layers around the bone, really important for aiding in fractures, and all of the bone cells are there in the periosteum. So you can see on your notes, it says periosteum, there's two layers. One layer is dense irregular, okay? So remember, it's strength in many directions. One layer is dense irregular, and another layer of the periosteum contains osteogenic and osteoblast cells. I know you don't know what those are, but later on you will. So I just wanted to tell you that there are some cells there too. What is this thing called the nutrient foramen? Foramen's a hole. So what's going to happen is you're going to have a big blood vessel, the nutrient artery. This big blood vessel is going to come and go literally inside the nutrient foramen, this hole. And you're going to have a whole bunch of blood vessels. Bone is very vascular. You'll have a whole bunch of blood vessels up here, on the inside, blood vessels out. You're also going to have blood vessels on the outside. There's periosteal blood vessels. That means going around. There's periosteal blood vessels that go all the way around the bone. There's metaphyseal blood vessels. That would be blood vessels that are around the metaphysis. That's what this spot is right here. There's epiphyseal arteries. there's diaphyseal arteries. Do you see how there's so much blood? Okay. So, you're not going to name these individually, these blood vessels. Maybe the nutrient foramen, you might need the nutrient artery. You might need to name that one. But in general, you just want to know, hey, it's super, super vascular, lots of blood supply. Okay. Endosteum, one more thing. Endosteum is a layer of cells also on the inside. And actually it's on the inside of spongy bone as well. It's all around these little bridges in the spongy bone. Endosteum has osteoblasts and osteogenic cells. You'll see that a little bit later, but I wanted to point that out now. Okay, very good. All right, let's go to the next page. And actually what it talks about next is the composition of bone. What's the composition of bone? So I'm just going to go to that, the composition of bone. And I moved a couple slides ahead just so you could talk about it. What is bone made out of? No matter if it's spongy or compact bone, what is it made out of? The matrix is about 25% water. And then remember remember blast cells, any kind of blast cells? Well, osteoblasts are blast cells. What do? They secrete matrix, right? So they're going to secrete collagen. It's 25% of what the matrix is. So they're going to secrete collagen, secrete. And then on top of that, we're going to see these calcium salts. Calcium, it has calcium phosphate, calcium carbonate, magnesium hydroxide. So a lot of salt, a lot of calcium salt. That's what gives the bone hardness. So there's collagen for flexibility and calcium for hardness. So take a look at, this is somebody that might have rickets. So they have the collagen, but they didn't have enough calcium salt to be deposited on it. So their bones are not strong. They don't have that strength. Okay. So what it's saying up here, as far as, I won't ask you about like organic versus inorganic, but the organic part is the collagen and the inorganic part are the salts, those calcium salts. And that's basically what you need from that page 2. The only thing at the bottom you'll see is that cells, it talks about the different types of cells, and that's what we're going to do next. So we've done the matrix, and now we're going to talk about cells. And I'm going a little bit out of order because I need to find the cells. Here's a cell. There's 4 kinds of cells, sort of. I mean, that's sort of true. A little bit true. You'll see what I mean. So osteogenic cells are stem cells for bone. They're bone stem cells. We find them in the endosteum and we find them in the periosteum. Okay. And they're stem cells that will become, they're bone stem cells. When they're sort of stimulated, we'll talk about this a little bit more as we go through this chapter, but when they're stimulated, they become osteoblasts. So they become osteoblasts. That's another cell type, but that's what they become. And they're in the endosteum and periosteum. And what do osteoblasts do? You know what they do, right? Because you're amazing. You know what they do. They make bone, don't they? They make the matrix. Now, once those osteoblasts secrete matrix all around them, they're living in a little house. And so you have an osteogenic cell, it becomes an osteoblast cell. Don't worry about these different names, the organelles. You just want to know, like, this becomes this, right? When it's stimulated, and the osteoblast will secrete matrix all around it. And then, unfortunately, it lives inside the matrix and it becomes an osteocyte. And in terms of bone, it's very hard on the outside, right? It's got collagen and then it's hard. So the little bone cell is stuck in there, the little osteocyte. It's stuck in there, and there is called the lacuna. So that's the house that it lives in. It's called the lacuna. You'll see that in a second. So you've got 3 bone cells. The last bone cell is not like the rest. Osteoclasts are different than all the other cells. Osteoclasts actually are really big. They kind of look like this. I don't like that drawing. This is what they look like. They're really big, and the bottom of them looks like, they almost look like scrubber bubbles. They've got this fringe on the bottom of them. I'm really trying to, and then they have a whole bunch of nuclei. They're really big, and they move around. They're moving around all the time. Anyway, they come up to the bone. So here's the bone below it. They come up to the bone, and they do something called resorption. They take calcium from the bone and put it back into the bloodstream. So osteoclasts break down bone. What are they doing? They're grabbing calcium away from the bone because your body doesn't really care. Your body's job, this is Ca++, that's calcium. Your body doesn't care if you have enough calcium in your bones. Doesn't, that's not its job. It only cares about the calcium in your bloodstream because that's your short-term homeostasis. You need it for every time a muscle contracts. You need it for other processes. So you're going to steal calcium from your bone anytime you need it, okay? Who's going to do that? Your osteoclasts are going to do that. Your osteoblasts are going to do the opposite job. I want everybody to take a moment to just think about this for a second. Osteoblasts are going to do what? What are osteoblasts going to do? They have the opposite job of the osteoclast. Everybody stay with me for a sec. Think about that. Osteoclasts are found in the same places as osteoblasts. They're both found together. So I have an osteoclast. It comes up and it starts breaking down some bone. That bone, I'm going to grab some of the calcium out of the bone. Now my little osteocyte is free. It becomes an osteoblast again, and it can secrete more bone. Now, here's the deal. They're kind of at war with each other. And part of bone remodeling, which we'll talk about in a second, is the war between clasts and blasts. So I just want you to just put that out in your mind, like every day I have a war going on between my blasts and my clasts. And what I do and what I eat and my activity levels will determine who wins. Okay, so just a little precursor of what we're going to be talking about. We will have more than one video today. It's cool. This is an awesome chapter. Bones are awesome. Okay, so I'm going to just clear the drawings on that. All right, where are you? You should be at the bottom of page 2. We just talked about cells. Okay, now turn it to page 3. And we're going to talk about compact bone tissue. Compact bone tissue. What does it look like? What does it look like? Well, this is a pretty good slide. I think it's just maybe the 3rd slide. 1, 2. Yeah, this is just like 3rd or 4th slide. So this is a pretty good slide. You also have some good pictures in your book. What is compact bone? Remember, it's really nice and heavy. So the functional unit is called the osteon inside there. And the osteon has, so there it looks, it's in circles, okay? This is compact bone. This right out here on the outside, that's spongy bone. We don't want that yet. So we're looking at compact bone. Compact bone does have a blood supply. The blood supply maybe came from it did come from the outside. And you have these perforating canals that come in, and the blood will go up through the osteon into these things called the central canal. This central canal provides the blood for the entire osteon. What's in the osteon? A whole bunch of osteocytes. So the blood supply in the central canal provides nutrients for the osteocytes, okay, that are living in there. There's a whole bunch of osteocytes living in there. Cool. It's good, but I want to show you another slide. Yeah, this is the slide I want to show you because we need to keep going. I haven't changed anything. I'm just on the same. I'm still on page 3. We need to look at this a little differently. So I'm actually going to look at some histology so you can see. This is an osteon here, right? I just circled this. This is an osteon. In the middle is the central canal. It's where the blood vessels are. And these little black lines that you can see, all these little black lines, those are lacuna. What lives inside the lacuna of the house? What lives inside there? Those are little osteocytes. The little osteocytes are connected to each other through these little canals. And these little canals are called canaliculi. The little canals allow the osteocytes to share nutrients, okay? So what'll happen is, I'm gonna do this in red, what'll happen is the central canal allows diffusion to occur, that's it. And diffusion of nutrients outward from the inside, diffusion of nutrients outward from the inside. This is how the osteocytes get their nutrition, get their glucose, get their oxygen. Otherwise they'll die. So they have to have a central canal that's working, okay? Good. A couple more things, osteons. I'm gonna go back to that other slide. You can see I'm just oscillating between a couple slides because just trying to hit all of these conversations that we're having here. Okay, perforating canals. I think we'll see that in lab. All right, lamellae. Lamellae is matrix. Lamellae is matrix. There's a lot of different types of lamellae, but it's still matrix. It's bone matrix. And so the osteon has what in it? It has osteocytes that live in here, has a central canal where the blood vessels are. The lamellae, you can see, are just these lines of matrix, okay? So the lamellae are lines of matrix. This is specifically called concentric lamellae when it's in an osteon. Circumferential lamellae is around the outside of the whole bone. So it just means that it's around the outside of the whole bone, it's the matrix. And then interstitial lamellae are found in between osteons. These are like old osteons. They're not really functional anymore. It's still matrix, but you don't have a central canal. It's sort of old osteons. Now, what do I mean by this? Bones are constantly being remodeled because the blast and the clasts are fighting with each other all day. So bone is getting more dense, getting less dense, getting more dense, getting less dense every day. So you often will see these interstitial lamellae that are not functional anymore. They're not like really working. There's no central canal. They're not getting those osteocytes the nutrition they need. And so that's happening all the time. This is called bone remodeling all the time, okay? Good. Central canal, okay, good. Now, organization, it says organization changes over time, but follow the stress lines. The more stress you put on a bone, from weightlifting, from running, from jarring it, the more stress you put on it, the more the osteoblasts are active. The more they make bone, the more dense the bone becomes. So the more you stress a bone, the thicker it will become. Who makes it thicker? Tell me which cell. Who makes the bone thicker? Which cell? Good. Blasts, right? Okay. All right, let's move on to the next page. All right. Let's talk about spongy bone. Cancellous or spongy bone. You can draw it. It's sort of a sandwich, okay? So you have spongy bone. The jelly is all this spongy bone. These little bridges right here, these are called trabeculae. So there's no osteons, there's trabeculae. It's not as strong, but the trabeculae still can break down and reform along stress lines. So you can have stronger spongy bone in somebody that works out a lot or exercises a lot, okay? But there are a lot more holes, it's a lot lighter. So that's spongy bone. And on the outsides of this particular bone, you can see, this is a flat bone. You can see that there's a little bit of compact bone on both sides. That's the way flat bones look, okay? So you've got this spongy bone in the center. Okay. Between the trabeculae, nice. Between these little trabeculae, there's blood, and it's a specific kind of blood. There's red marrow, and red marrow is where bone cells are made. Sorry, where blood cells are made. Okay. Good, good, good. You still have osteocytes in here. You still have lacuna in here. Can't see it right now because we're not zoomed in enough, but you still have those inside spongy bone. Okay. We talked about the blood supply already. So I'm going to move on to page 5. And we're going to start with bone formation. So let's move to bone. When we talk about bone formation, we're going to go to, right. Oh, maybe we're not going to go to bone formation. Let's just stop here for a moment and talk about bone remodeling for a moment. We're looking at the head of the femur. So the femur is in your leg and it's connected to your pelvis. And this is the proximal end of your femur, okay? Proximal end. So the epiphysis of this bone has mostly spongy bone, okay? It's spongy bone all in here, spongy bone, spongy bone. All right, so you can see spongy bone. What does it look like? It has the little trabeculae. These are trabeculae. And inside the trabeculae, you could look inside here, there's lamellae, right? That's just matrix. And there's little osteocytes that live inside there, okay? These holes, what are these holes? So let's take a look at these holes. I'm gonna do you see these holes here inside the trabeculae? Those are literally holes. Those holes allow nutrients to get in there. So we've got blood around the trabeculae. And the only way for the little osteocytes to get nutrition is for diffusion to happen. So they diffuse nutrients in because they're stuck inside there. Oh. All right, now let's get to the bone remodeling part. So then down here at the bottom, so this part, what these purple and red lines are showing is stress lines. So the more stress I put on my femur, what is going to happen to the density of my bone and which cells are in charge of that? So lots of questions here. So let me put walking type of stress. If I'm a person that puts a lot of walking type of stress on my bones, walking and running, my stress lines are going to be a little different than a person that does ballet or a person that does hip hop, okay? That's cool. So the stress lines of two people are going to be different. But let's take two athletes. Let's take a hip hop dancer and a runner. Even though the stress lines are different, are they both putting stress on their body, on their bones? They are. So which two, if I'm talking about osteoblasts in class, who's getting to win this war? Think about that for a second. Who's winning the war when you're exercising a lot? What's happening to the density of my bone when I put more stress on it? Okay, and you could put more stress on it by weightlifting, because what weightlifting does is it still puts a stress on the bone for the osteoblasts to get excited. They get excited when you put stress on your bones, but also bigger muscles. The more muscle you build, the bigger bone you need to have to support the muscle. Yeah, so it works both ways. All right, and over here, they're just sort of talking about how you really don't have osteons in spongy bone. It provides strength, but it's light. Okay, very good. All right, now we're going to talk about bone formation. Maybe, oh no, we're not. We're going to talk about, I don't know, we're going to talk about bone marrow. So red marrow is found, where is it found? It's found in the flat bones, okay, a lot of flat bones. And it's also found at the ends, at the epiphyses of long bones, okay, in adults. In children, it's actually found even in the medullary cavity. Yellow marrow is in the medullary cavity of adults. Okay, so medullary cavity of long bones. All right, beautiful. Okay, now we're going to talk about let's make bones. Ossification is making a bone. It happened in utero. Before we were born, we were making our bones, okay? Around week 8, we're making bones really early on. Calcification just means that you're going to put calcium salt somewhere. So if somebody gets a bone spur or a corn in their foot, you can actually make osteoblasts. The osteoblasts will listen to whatever. So you can, if you have a lot of rubbing in an area, the osteoblasts are like, wait, should I make bone there? Should I secrete bone matrix? And so you can get calcification anywhere in the body. But ossification is the true formation of bone, which is what we're going to talk about next, okay? So we're talking about ossification. It involves, putting calcium down, but it's a very organized, it's very, very organized. And there's 2 kinds, okay? We're going to talk about intramembranous first, and that happens with flat bones, or bones that act flat or that are mostly flat, like your skull, your sternum. And then we'll talk about endochondral ossification. Those are bones that are long or somewhat long, okay? So that's what we're going to talk about next. And then after that, we'll talk about bone growth, getting longer, nutrition and hormones and that kind of thing. Okay, so that's the layout of the rest of the chapter. And we might do fractures at the end, I think. Yeah. So we're going to talk about bone formation. We're on page 5. And I think I'm going to stop the video for here. We're probably going to need 3 videos this week. It's a lot of stuff, I know. But let's take a break. Stop this one.